The Win Place Show is back. Salutations and welcome, horse racing fans. I'm your host, Matthew DeSantis. You can find me on Twitter at the handle @FailToMenace. And welcome back, for some of you, to the Win Place Show. The Win Place Show was a program that I had about a year ago, did for quite a while. It was a podcast. Bringing it back here for Trust the Profits. Make sure to like and subscribe below, and make sure to comment with your thoughts on today's discussion about the Eclipse Awards. Like I said, really thrilled to be bringing the Win Place Show back. What can you expect out of this program? Well, we're going to come to you every week with 2 episodes, Tuesdays and Wednesdays. Tuesdays will be a little bit more of a race recap in some instances, what we learned, what I got right, what I got wrong from the week before, that sort of stuff. Wednesday is going to be a little bit more industry news, updates, interviews with different people around the industry and different people in horse racing. So should be a lot of fun, especially while we're in this little bit of a lull period after the Breeders' Cup, really kind of before the championship meet at Gulfstream Park and Pegasus, and then things start to kick off on the Derby Trail, etc. But never fear, Trust the Profits has you covered. We got Derby preps that Colin Sheehan's going to be covering. I'm still going to be doing some capping the card stuff. Obviously, the Win Play Show. You got El Hombre doing live streams on Thursday nights at Chucktown. I mean, you can't ask for much more than that. So a lot of great stuff for you to check out on the Trust the Profits. Like I said, make sure to subscribe. So as I mentioned, is a little bit of a downtime of year. We're done with the Breeders' Cup. There's a little bit of a lull in the schedule. We have the Cumley Stakes coming up. We obviously have the Cigar Mile coming up after that. So a couple of races at Aqueduct that we'll be previewing on the show and previewing on the channel. But one of the big discussions that we have is the Eclipse Awards. Now that the Breeders' Cup has been run, you would think that the Eclipse Awards and these end-of-the-year awards for the best horse, the best 3-year-old, the best 3-year-old filly, the best turf horse, the best, all these different categories that they have, you would think it would become crystallized, but it's actually gotten a little murkier, particularly in some categories. And so I have decided to invite a very special guest on today to help talk with me about the Eclipse Awards and some of the issues that the award structure has, and maybe some of the debates taking place, particularly within the top 3-year-old division. And that guest is none other than Chuck Simon, who I feel like I've known forever because I know his co-host on Going in Circles, Barry Spears, so well. But Chuck is a longtime veteran of horse racing who has held a variety of positions during his decades in the business. Most notably, he was a very successful trainer for over 20 years, had over 350 winners, over $11 million in earnings, including 30 stakes races at venues across the country. He's also a graduate of the University of Arizona's racetrack management program. And as I mentioned earlier, he's a co-host with Barry Spears on the Monday podcast, Going in Circles, which if you don't listen to, you absolutely have to subscribe. So it is my pleasure to welcome Chuck Simon to the program and to the Win Place Show. Chuck, thank you so much for coming on today.
Hey, thank you. I'm honored to be the first guest on the Win Place Show recap, or your revival.
Yeah.
The revival.
Yeah, revival. Yeah, revival. No, I appreciate it. And it kind of I wasn't sure this was going to be a revival for a while. And then when I did, I was like, oh, this is perfect. That Chuck's going to be the first guest. So this is great. So
I'll try to live up to your expectations.
Well, one of the things that does live up to our expectations is debates on horse racing Twitter. That never seems to cease. And one of the big debates I think that we've already started to see happen, and that will continue to probably happen, is this debate over some of the Eclipse Award categories, these end of the year awards for the top trainer, top jockey, top owners, etc. But also getting into the different horse categories, particularly the top 3-year-old is a very debated topic. But before we get into that, and I think you and I may have some similar sentiments on that position, but before we get into that, I wanted to take a step back and ask you, from the standpoint of somebody who is in the industry, what do the Eclipse Awards mean, either to you maybe personally or just largely to the industry? Does this stuff matter, in other words, in any way? Or is it just kind of an award to put on the shelf that collects dust? But are there kind of from a standpoint of siring fees, does these sorts of things, factor into this? Or, I just am curious how much this plays in terms of these off-track awards.
Well, it depends on your view. I mean, to us, they don't really matter. I mean, what difference does it really make? They don't even
Right.
put wagering on these races. If they had a
Right.
future book for the Eclipse Awards, it would mean more to us. But yeah, I mean, they certainly have value for, um, breeding purposes.
Hmm.
Certainly, a championship is a feather in the cap, and um, I mean, it's not going to make or break a horse, put it that way. But uh, it's interesting that we got so caught up on this on Twitter, especially because me personally, I have told people a long time ago. I said, if we're ever fortunate enough to get a horse that qualifies or is in the running for an Eclipse Award, I'm not going to that award thing. That's not going to happen. There's no chance I'm going to get that stupid tuxedo and sit around, and it's just not going to happen. I said, like, it doesn't mean that much to me. So I'm telling you now. um, but as an industry, we do a lot of things poorly, and I think we do the awards poorly. And I think that there needs to be more structure to them. I think that just qualifying by saying, well, you need to run in one race in North America this year.
Right.
Well, okay, that's fine. But that can't be your only qualifier. And I'm not saying that you should have um, uh, a point system or anything like that. What I'm
Yeah.
saying is that things need to be a little bit more clearly defined. There's a couple pet peeves that have bothered me for a long time, and one of them, of course, is something that you can't really mandate, but you can put it out there, and that is considering mile races in the sprint division. They're
Mm,
not sprints. You
yeah.
go in the condition book, a mile race is in the route section, not the sprint
Right.
section. And I think for whatever reason, are they similar? Are they more similar to a sprint than a, a, a strict two-turn race? Of course they are, but they're not sprints.
Right.
Belmont runs mile and an eighth one-turn races. No one's
Right.
calling those sprints.
Yeah.
And I mean, you can't tell me that um, if I'm a voter, well, you should say only sprint races should be considered in the sprint category.
Mm,
Um, Now, you can't prevent someone from going on their own and voting a horse because of their performance in mile races.
hmm.
And is this really a big deal? No, not really. But um, it matters. I mean,
Right.
in baseball, they're not going to give a left fielder the second baseman Gold Glove because there was two left fielders that had a good year and there wasn't a great second baseman. So hey, let's just
Right.
give it to him. I mean,
Right.
sprinters are
Right.
sprinters. Sprint
Yeah.
races are 7 furlongs or less around one turn,
Yeah.
and that's how the definition has always been, and that's how it always will be. Um, the other issue is something that uh, I think you have to take on an individual basis, and there's a lot of other factors that go in, and that's the European effect.
Hmm.
Um, Technically, you can take into consideration a European horse's European races, which to me makes no sense if we're talking about North American records.
Right.
I gave the example of Baaid, who clearly had the best turf resume of any horse um, anywhere
Sure.
this year.
Yeah.
If he had come over and run in the Breeders' Cup turf and run fifth here in his only North
Right.
American start,
Hmm.
based upon that standard that you can count the European races as long as a horse has one start in North America, well, he would be turf champion. I mean,
Right.
he should be based on those criteria. And I think that you get where a lot of people are looking at it differently. And I don't think that's how it should be. I think that
Yeah.
you should vote based upon the credentials of the horses, but they should be the credentials that everyone else is looking at as well, not letting people just decide, well, I'm going to count the European races.
Right.
And again, you can't prevent a person from voting as long as the horse has a start. But you know, I just and there's been years where European horses come over and dominated in our turf races and been
Right.
named turf champion, and I have no problem with that
Yeah.
because that's based on their North American victory, and
Right.
it's always years where there's not a strong candidate.
Yeah.
And people, I know there's people that don't like that. They don't like a one race campaign, and that's
Right.
understandable. And that's where people's um, uh, decision on who
Hmm.
they care to vote for is fine, but they should all be voting based upon the same criteria. And I
Yeah.
think that's the issue where I see different guys using different criteria to vote for the same award. And it just to me seems like it's a game that um, of specialists in a way, and
Yeah.
that we should kind of, at least unblur the lines a little bit. And,
Yeah.
you know, sorry for ranting, but
Yeah. No,
it,
no.
it just seems like those are things that could be clarified, and at least,
Yeah.
um, and I'm not going to complain about the number of voters. I kind of am, but there's a tremendous amount of people voting on these things,
Yeah.
and we as an industry don't have a whole lot of actual like full blown media out there.
Right.
Newspapers don't cover our races anymore. For the most part, there's very few industry um, outlets
Yeah.
that are traditional. But there's still there's hundreds of people that vote,
Yeah.
and I just sometimes you see the tallies at the end, and like I said in the beginning,
Yeah.
it doesn't really matter to us, but
Yeah.
I would
Yeah.
just think that we could do it better, and
Yeah.
I'm sure no one will listen to us, but what the hell.
Well, hopefully a few people listen, but whether or not that makes any difference, we'll see. But uh, I know what you're talking about in terms of the vote tallies. I know a lot of people just like skip the steeplechase voting because they just don't, they either don't follow it all or don't know it at all and things like that. One of the things that I was interested in, and this was a debate that kind of sprouted up last year a little bit, is and this year, obviously, the horse of the year is going to be a no doubt about it. Flightline. That's kind of we can take that to the bank. But last year, it was interesting. There wasn't necessarily a clear consensus with Knicks Go. Prior to the Breeders' Cup Classic, there was like, well, if he wins the Breeders' Cup Classic, then yes. But if
Right.
Essential Quality does, then maybe that. And so there was some debate. And I remember at one point there was also some debate about Latruska, who over the summer had just gone on this roll at Saratoga and even before that at Oaklawn and had racked up all these grade one wins. And, obviously then we saw what happened in the distaff, just got eaten up by that pace. But it was funny because for a while people would just dismiss Latruska out of hand and go, well, yeah, but if you lined her up against Knicks Go would win. And I kind of thought to myself, well, is the horse of the year just like a match race? Like, are we just putting two horses against each other and going, which of these is faster? Or are you going, which of these two horses was more dominant within their division? And especially last year, it didn't feel, at least earlier in the year, as if there was a dominant horse necessarily. And so
Right.
that was something that just always, I don't know if it struck me wrong, but it just struck me funny that somehow people would just dismiss Latruska out of hand because she couldn't beat Knicks Go. And I was like, that's not how at least I would understand the horse of the year, of going, which of these two horses is faster going a mile and a quarter or something like that.
Yeah, there's always that question mark for horse of the year, in that what is the horse of the year? It's just like in mainstream sports, what's the MVP?
Right,
You
right,
know, can a guy on a last place team be the MVP because he has the
right,
best stats? But are we going to actually try to measure his value versus a guy whose team wins? And
right.
I think in racing, we get into that situation, especially when you're talking about fillies,
Yeah,
or even 3-year-olds. Like,
yeah.
we expect 3-year-olds now to take on older horses at the end of the year.
Hmm.
Um, and fillies, we expect them to take on males if they want to win the horse of the year.
Right.
Even though there's been occasions where that didn't happen. Um, yeah, horse of the year is kind of tough because it it's not a defined, really, who's the best horse, because Knicks Go is a better horse than Latrushka. If you lined them
Sure.
up against each other, he would have beat her,
Yeah.
most likely.
Yeah.
But that, I always thought we should be voting on accomplishment. Um,
Yeah.
though, you say to yourself, and like you had mentioned, dominance over your division. Well, does that mean a sprinter could
Right.
be could be that, and or even a 2-year-old like Secretariat.
Right.
Not that there's going to be any 2-year-olds that run more than like 3 times.
Right. Right.
But
Yeah.
I say that like, uh, like somebody's going to debut in May and run, full 8-race schedule and win 5 grade ones. It's not going to happen. But
No, not anymore.
it's like the People Award too. I mean,
Yeah.
what signifies the champion owner or trainer or breeder? Because if you just go by numbers, well, you can eliminate 99% of the participants,
Sure.
99.8% of the participants.
Yep.
So I don't know. I mean, you look at this year's trainer standings, the money is very close between Chad Brown, Steve Asmussen, and Todd Pletcher. None of them had a spectacular year where you would say, "Oh man, this guy's he's won everything."
Right.
I mean, they win a ton, but
Sure.
as nothing has really stood out. Put it that way. I mean, Todd won 2 Breeders' Cup races, but he had about 15 in.
Right.
So,
Yeah, you're bound to hit a few winners if you do that.
So I don't know. I don't know how to vote for those. I wouldn't know, like, and I guess we do have some races still have to go. Some big
Sure.
races. We have the Churchill Downs Thanksgiving weekend, and then we have the Cigar Mile weekend.
Yeah.
But it's hard to really say that there's any races or that are going to separate them. So I'm not sure. And the Breeders, same thing. I mean,
yeah.
Godolphin probably has 250 brood mares.
Exactly. Yeah.
So how does the guy that has 12, and unless he comes up with 5 grade 1 winners or something like totally unlikely,
right?
It's a tough one. The jockey thing is not easy either. And I mean, some years you have a situation where a guy win a couple Triple Crown races, a couple of the other big 3-year-old races, we win 3 Breeders' Cup races, and then it gets to be a little easier.
Yeah.
But the People ones are difficult. I mean, it's just does John Sadler get a vote? I mean,
sure,
he's had a good year. I mean, he's done a terrific job of Flightline.
Yeah,
obviously. I mean, but do we reward him for that, or do we? I don't know. I really, I don't have an answer to those questions. I just don't like when people use milers as sprint races.
Well, speaking of one of the divisions that got us into a little bit of a debate, and it is a little bit of maybe a messier division this year, is the 3-year-old division. Because I think you and I are probably on the same page that Epicenter feels like the most logical choice for the top 3-year-old, based upon what he did over the summer, based upon how well he ran in the Preakness and the Derby. But then he had the injury, obviously, at the Breeders' Cup Classic. Now, didn't finish that race. And you have Taiba, who has 2 grade 1s under his belt, who finished 3rd in that race. You have Rich Strike, who won the Kentucky Derby. And then apparently people are just giving participation points to for not being terrible in other races. And, running a strong second at the Lucas, but running 4th at the Travers, running 4th again at the Classic. And then there's the horse that I think is kind of a little bit of the fly in the ointment with some of this and goes back to that sprinting routing debate is Jack Christopher, who has 2 grade 1s and a grade 2 under his belt and finished 3rd in the Haskell, another grade 1. So I'm curious, kind of, what are your thoughts on that 3-year-old crop? Do you see it as Epicenter up top? How close do you see maybe some of those other horses being to Epicenter in that spot?
I think Epicenter will win. I think if I had a vote, I would vote for Epicenter. I mean, Rich Strike is a non-starter. He won 1 race.
Yep.
If you look at, and there's a horse you didn't mention that I think.
Oh, Cyberknife. Yeah. Sorry.
Not even Cyberknife. I think Modern Games might have a better.
Oh, yes.
Case. Put it this way: after the Travers, no one was not voting for Epicenter for 3-year-old of the year.
Right.
Well, he broke down his next race, and that's unfortunate.
Yeah.
But Taiba won the Pennsylvania Derby, which was a solid race.
Yeah.
He beat a lot of of the contenders. He beat Sandon, he beat Cyberknife, he beat White Abaro, he beat Simplification, he beat a lot of horses that won Derby preps.
Yeah.
But is that race good enough to overcome the others? The lack of wins between that and the Santa Anita Derby, which was the worst Santa Anita Derby ever outside of Taiba.
It's pretty bad. Yeah.
Literally the worst. Like none of the horses are ever going to win another race. And that's, I can say that like with confidence. I would be shocked if any horses won any races out of that race.
Yeah. I mean, I was there. I watched Messier run. Yeah. I watched Messier run on the Breeders' Cup undercard the one day. And I was like, oof, that was, that was.
And I want to thank everyone who bet that horse in that race. That was like one of the gifts.
Seriously.
He had no chance. He's not a good horse. And he peaked and he was done and he's been done.
Yeah.
But anyways, I just think Epicenter has the most credentials for the year. I don't buy, the Louisiana Derby is a grade 2. It's nonsense. None of those races should be grade 1s. The Arkansas Derby, the Bluegrass, the Wood, none of them should be grade 1s because they're prep races.
Yeah.
They're prep races for the Kentucky Derby. No one's pointing to the Wood for the Wood. No one's pointing for the Santa Anita Derby for the Santa Anita Derby.
Right.
They're using it as a stepping stone to the Triple Crown.
Yeah.
So I don't think those races should be graded, but that's a whole nother show. But I have a hard time saying, Louisiana Derby that the Epicenter won wasn't as good as the Arkansas Derby, which again was another race that was beyond the winner, was terrible. Yeah. And that's, when I say a race is terrible, that doesn't mean the winner is. It means everyone beyond him. And there's nothing they can do about it. They can't control who they beat.
Right.
But when you're looking at it from, looking back at it, he won the Risen Star. He won the Louisiana Derby. He was second in the Preakness. He was second in the Kentucky Derby. He won the Jim Dandy, and he won the Travers. I mean, people that have a problem with that being named championship, I don't know. I mean, to me, the Breeders' Cup is you can't give them. That's like a not applicable. You can't like judge them on that. And to me, the argument is really, for second, and I would vote for Taiba because he beat Cyberknife in the Pennsylvania Derby fair and square. And what difference does it really make though?
Yeah, I mean, and then Cyberknife came back and ran second at the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile and lost to Cody's Wish, and so that was, I think, took a little shine off of that. If he had won that, then maybe there's an argument that he has a Breeders' Cup win, and
true,
that might have added something. Modern Games is an interesting argument in terms of obviously dominant in the two races here in North America this year at both the Woodbine Mile and then at the Breeders' Cup Mile. And obviously a good resume overseas as well. But that is, I mean, I don't think American voters are going to go there. Mostly American voters are going to go to Modern Games as a top 3-year-old, but that's a compelling argument. And I think actually maybe more compelling than some of the other names.
I believe that he has the most compelling argument outside of Epicenter.
Yeah.
That said, I think that a lot of voters might not even realize he's a 3-year-old.
Right.
And
it does feel like he's been around for a while because we got to know him last year because of the juvenile debacle. And
and he did beat older horses twice, and he did win a Breeders' Cup race, and those are unimpeachable credentials. Yeah. But he's a turf miler. In this country, those are not our biggest races. And let's face it, and Ed DeRosa gets all pissed off when I say this, but the turf males in this country are horrible.
They are.
They're
not
stink.
Good.
They're terrible. And that is not my opinion. That's fact.
I mean, all you have to do is look at what we saw in the Breeders' Cup. I mean,
just look at their records and where they finished in the Breeders' Cup.
Yeah.
7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th. So, and no one has taken control of the division the entire year. And yes, Modern Games was spectacular at Woodbine, and he was really good at winning that. But to me, it comes down to an American-based horse racing in our biggest 3-year-old races, a horse who People want to downgrade being second in the Kentucky Derby. It's second in the Kentucky Derby. It's second in the Preakness.
Yeah.
The Travers, I put those rankings up. The Travers is probably the fourth most important 3-year-old race we have.
Right.
So he was second in the most important. He was second in the second or third most important. He won the fourth most important.
Yep.
I just have a hard time thinking that that is not a championship resume, because I think it is.
Yeah, I agree. No, I do. I agree. And I think, it was also the way in which he won that Travers too. I mean, just with ease. I mean, just
Dominant, right?
dominant, and pulled away from Cyberknife and Zandon and Rich Strike, and just, one of the better, probably the best. I think probably the most complete effort of any 3-year-old I saw all year.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it.
Yeah, and so very impressed. I do, like I said, I mentioned Jack Christopher earlier. I'm a big fan of Jack. I know the 2-turn experiment didn't work, but it was, not running in the Breeders' Cup, getting scratched, and now obviously being put out to stud. And it was just one of those, like, what happens if Jack Christopher runs in that Breeders' Cup, and obviously we saw Jackie's Warrior did not have his A game, and is not the Jackie's Warrior of last year, perhaps. And Jack Christopher wins that Breeders' Cup. Now it's similar to Cyberknife. Now suddenly there's maybe a debate about going, well, here's this kind of 3-year-old sprinter who is kind of cleaning up that division and winning all the big sprint races in that division. Do we give it to him instead? Obviously that didn't happen. So I think that kind of hurts his resume.
He had a good year. I mean, he would have been Sprinter of the Year had he won the Breeders' Cup.
Yes.
The Woody Stevens, the Jerkins, and the Breeders' Cup Sprint. I mean, there's a really good debate about who should be champion sprinter this year.
There is, especially with what we saw coming out of that sprint at the Breeders' Cup. You're right.
And I mean, I was someone who savaged the Vosberg before the race. And it's funny because I did it last year too, and it's sad to me because the Vosberg used to be a very, very strong race.
Yeah.
And it just has not been. It just hasn't been. It lost its grade 1 status, and it really has been. I mean, this year's field was really, really bad, and the winner was good.
Yes,
Elite Power. And if I had a vote, I probably would vote for Elite Power. And it seems like a cop out, but he won the Vosberg, and was it a bad race? Yes. But he did win the biggest sprint of the year, and that's the Breeders' Cup. Right. And to me, that's the separator, because I just feel like it's tougher this year to give it to Jackie's Jackie's Warrior because he lost his last 2 races.
Yes,
going into and he didn't really have any excuse. It wasn't as though he got some kind of trouble or something like that. It just is, it just feels wrong. Yeah. And I mean, you could make a case, if you're going to make a case for Cody's Wish, I'm going to make a case for Life is Good, because he was as dominant in the Nehrud as anyone was.
Yeah.
Or we could just make it easy and just give all the awards to Flightline. Just give them the sprint.
It's funny. I was just about to say,
steeplechase. Because he would have won the steeplechase had he been in it. He'd have been 500 lengths ahead at that mile pole.
He was it was incredible. I mean, it's funny he is the reason though that I went to the Breeders' Cup this year. I mean, I was kind of hemming and hawing and on the fence and didn't know if I was going to go, and at the last second, about 2 weeks out, I was like, something, I think this horse is going to do something pretty special, and I kicked myself if I didn't get down there to do it, because I'm only, I can drive to Lexington from where I live, and so I was like, I got to get down there, and so it was a good excuse.
I got in a lot of trouble.
Go ahead.
I got in a lot of trouble, Matt, over him.
What trouble did you get in?
Daring to suggest that he should retire, because there really isn't any reason to keep him going, because there's no competition, and
I totally agree. And
the economics of it, just like, and I'm not one of those people who are like, oh my God, he might break down, but the chance, he's going to be 5. He has 6 lifetime races,
right?
And he has the issues. He's not going to run. He's not going to do a cigar-like campaign where he starts off at Gulfstream in the winter and runs at Oaklawn and runs in well, I was going to say Suffolk and Arlington, but they're not there anymore. But, he runs all over the country. That's not going to happen. It's going to be 3 races. And hell, if he runs over in the Middle East, it might be 2 races.
Right.
And you say to yourself, who's waiting in the wings for him?
Right.
Nobody.
Nobody.
Nobody. And it's like, I mean, they could run him into Pegasus. Do you really need to see him beat up on White Barrio?
Right.
Sorry, Rennie, but I mean, seriously, we don't give horses weight anymore. They don't carry weight.
Right.
And he's won the Met Mile.
Yeah.
And if you don't go to the Middle East in the early part of the season, we don't have a whole lot of races beyond the Pegasus that are that important. It's sad that the Santa Anita Derby has really kind of fallen on hard times, but it fell on hard times because, they put up a $12 million race against it and a $20 million race against it.
Right.
And it just isn't the same as what it was. Keeneland doesn't really have any, grade 1 important races in the spring. Churchill doesn't have anything until the Stephen Foster, and that's in June.
Right.
Late June. So, we wouldn't be seeing him very often either. And that's the case I tried to make. And, there's insurance issues.
Sure.
And I know, like, we're not supposed to worry about the rich people stuff, but you're not talking about self-insuring a horse for a few $1 million. You're talking like $40 million. Like, they were going to have trouble getting it. All the money they won racing would go. It might not even cover, unless they went to Saudi or Dubai.
Yeah.
It wouldn't even cover that. And, I just would cringe at just watching him run. And to me, like, he's not a horse that you can just gallop around the track. He's going to run fast.
Yeah. Yes, he is.
Even when, like, Pratt tried to like, slow him down, and he was still going really fast. That's what makes him really great. Is not only his ability to run fast, but his willingness. And to me, I just said, honestly, like, do we really need to see him beat up on the B team? Because he beat every single good horse in training. Hell, between him and Life is Good, they retired Poor Speaker's Corner.
Yes, they did.
He was running 115 buyers
and
before those two,
poof.
Like Flightline body slammed him, and then Life is Good kind of, threw him out of the ring, and that was it for old Speaker's Corner.
Yeah, no, that horse is a shell of it was a shell of his former self by the time they were through with him. And yeah, I mean, it's I agree with you. There wasn't much more to prove, I think, for Flightline. I'm just glad we got those 6 races, and because they were amazing, and to watch the ease with which he won, and the dominance with which he won, and the power, like you said, with which he ran, was just so incredible to see somebody run that fast for that long. I mean, I credit Irad and Pletcher and the connections for putting Life is Good in that race and running the race they did. I mean, they went out and they ran that 45-2 opening half, and they went and that was what, because I was worried when I watched the what was the race up at Belmont at Aqueduct? Was it the Woodford or
the Woodward? Yeah,
the Woodward. Yeah, and he was strangling out that like 48-2 opening half, and I'm like, oh, please don't do this. And so
that was not a good look. That race.
That was a bad look.
They won't be using that race in his stallion promotions.
No. So, but no, this was enjoyable to talk to you about. I really have enjoyed hearing your perspective on some of the dynamics of the Eclipse Awards. I know this is something you just talked to Barry about on this last episode of Going in Circles, but let people know more about the podcast, where they can find it, and where they can find you on social media.
Well, on social media, you can get me at Twitter at Cannon Shell, or on Facebook, though. Horse racing Facebook is like it's like anarchy every day, so it's tough there. But of course, that where you can always email me at Going in Circles podcast at Gmail. But Barry and I do a show on every Monday. Usually we do it at night, so it doesn't get, people don't hit it until Tuesday. But we talk about all kinds of stuff, just like we did here, and a lot of hot takes. Even though we don't consider them hot takes, we just consider them opinions. But we have fun with it, and it seems some people hate us, but that's the way it goes. I mean, if there's not people hating on you, then you're not doing it right. You know,
I could not agree more. I read the YouTube comments regularly for that. So the no, listen, I appreciate it. And listen, I got a couple of big drives coming up the next couple of weeks. Driving down to see my folks in South Carolina and back. Listening to you and Barry is absolutely something I'm going to be doing. You guys should absolutely check it out on the Going in Circles podcast. Chuck, appreciate your time. And thank you so much for being the first guest back on this revival of the Win Play show.
It's an honor, man. I'm the first batter. I'm the leadoff hitter.
Well, you did a Ricky Henderson type of job. Much appreciated. And I'll talk to you later.
See ya. Thank you.
Well, folks, thanks so much for tuning into the first episode of the Win Play show. Like I said, make sure to like and subscribe. Trust the Profits. Make sure to follow me on Twitter at the handle @FailedToMenace. And remember, until next time, friends, it's now post time.